Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Reason TV. Today we're talking with William Binney. He was a longtime NSA employee who quit the service, the National Security Agency, shortly after the 9/11 attacks when he was acting as technical leader for intelligence. He's kind of like Edward Snowden 1.0. In 2002, you, Kirk Wiebe, and Edward Loomis asked the Department of Defense to investigate the NSA, an agency you had been working at for 30 years plus, for wasting money on Trailblazer. What was Trailblazer? What did it do, and why did you object to that?
Trailblazer was the NSA's attempt to catch up with the digital age. That is, communications were exploding, and they wanted to. Felt they were falling behind, so they tried to create a program that was to try to bring them into that digital age so they can manage the communications and sorting out what was important for them to look at. The problem is Trailblazer didn't do anything. As far as I know, it didn't produce anything for roughly a little over $4 billion.
And this was an attempt to, was this an attempt to vacuum up all forms of digital communications and transactions and things like that?
Originally, I don't know if they had that as their objective, but certainly they had the objective was to be able to deal with it. So if they didn't vacuum it up, they had to at least look through it.
Right.
So,
and you say it was a waste of money, partly because it was ineffective.
Yeah, it never produced anything. Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Is that a general problem with these kinds of overarching technological solutions to information gathering, that when you start bringing in everything, you can't people always talk about it's like finding a needle in a haystack, and a lot of people seem to want to have more and more hay rather than more and more needles. Yes,
that's part of the problem. The other part is they brought in contractors from the outside, engineers and computer scientists and things like that, to solve what is fundamentally an analytic problem. So they didn't have the expertise to solve it, and yet the NSA was outsourcing the job to do that to contractors who didn't have the background.
What do you mean by that? How is an analytic issue separate from collection of data?
Well, for example, the public switch telephone network. If you want to address that, how do you pick out the public switch telephone network? All the things that are important for you to look at as an analyst to report on. That is, if there are just terrorists calling into somebody in California and somebody in California calling Yemen or something like that, then how do you figure out what's important in that data to pull out so that your analyst can look at? Well, you have to know the public switch telephone network is organized, the numbering scheme for the worldwide plan, and know how to look at blocks of allocations of numbers and which ones work with other numbers, and basically building social networks. That's an analytic issue to target. And then you say these are the groups of targets I want from that data. So then that becomes your priority list of targets, and you list them for them to sort out as you see them.
And we'll come back to this, but so that's the beginning. It's analytics is what tells you what information you should be looking for.
It makes it possible for you to smartly do it. Yeah.
Okay, and you had proposed, or you were a champion of a program called ThinTread, as opposed to Trailblazer, and I assume that was something that would allow you to focus on information you thought was obviously important.
Yes, in fact, we had that one running on 3 different sites, full time, 24 hours a day for in late November 2000. We had all the system running all the way back to the analysts and into the databases. So we had the entire problem solved.
Why would the NSA say, yeah, that's nice, but we don't want that. We're going to go with a big program that costs more money but doesn't get any results? Well,
because it helps build their empire.
Right.
Okay, adds more people to the government rolls, adds more contractors, more contracts, more money.
Right.
So the budget goes up. So you get a bigger budget, you get a bigger organization. That's what it.
Now, you were extremely frustrated that the NSA, or that the American intelligence community, did not manage to provide the type of intelligence that would have prevented 9/11. Did that play into your decision to leave?
Fundamentally, yeah. It's all really wrapped together, because when you have an agenda that focuses more in a corrupt way, building contracts and so on, instead of focusing on solving the mission, which is intelligence, and then predicting intentions and capabilities of potential enemies, terrorists and so on, so that you can stop it. When you focus on money acquisition as the main issue as opposed to intelligence production, you're defeating the entire purpose of the agencies.
And you have talked about, I mean, do you have evidence, or was this work that you were doing before 9/11 or before the war on terror was kind of officially inaugurated, that the NSA and other intelligence agencies were actually doing kind of mass gathering of data and surveillance on Americans?
No, in fact, that was one of their major problems. They couldn't collect enough. That was they only were doing minuscule amounts.
On America, or people in America?
Well, on the on the internet, or the phone networks were much more easy to manage because they had the telecommunications company helping them.
Right.
But the internet was a total different story. So they had to build that one. That's what Trailblazer was all about, to try to
catch up,
acquire that. And yeah, and to catch up with the rates, and they called it the volume, velocity, variety problem. Like in the internet, you get voice over IP, video, all kinds of communications, file transfers, chatter, email, all kinds of things. So that was the variety. Velocity is going to speed of light, and volume means there's a lot of it.
Right.
So, but with thin thread, we looked at that as those are all positive things. Volume means you get more data to look through to find your targets. You get more data on your targets. Velocity, of course, means you get it faster, and variety means you get more aspects. All of that's positive. So that's what we leveraged, and that's what we had working before 9/11.
Right. Do you think that the U.S. should have been able to stop 9/11, or at least uncover the plot?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so was the primary failure, because you hear about this, and when we looked at the actual kind of coordination of agencies between various FBI bureaus and whatnot, it seemed like, I mean, it was tantalizingly, tragically close to having the plot, or at least some of the conspirators, stop beforehand. Is it a human failing? Is it a technological failing? Is it a political failing? What allowed 9/11 to happen?
Well, I think it was probably a mixture of all of that.
Yeah.
Humans, because first of all, a lot of the material they didn't recognize, or they didn't see in the database, because they had a lot of data at the time. They thought they had a lot of data, but it really was only probably 1/10 of 1% of what was really out there. So they, even with that minuscule amount, relatively, they still couldn't find information.
Right.
So it was still sitting there. So the humans couldn't get it. And the technology issue was one of automation. That is, we had to build in automated processes that would go through that data to pull out what was important, what we knew about, and things that were related, so that then we could push that to the top of the queue of analysts to look at.
Talk a little bit about, I mean, so let's say you're sifting through networks that include telephone calls, numbers going in, because we're talking here not about actually listening to the calls, but about the metadata, right? About who called whom, when.
That's how you would select the information out to record. Yeah.
Right, and then there's also internet traffic. Walk through, how do you possibly figure out, like how do you blend those together so that, okay, people who are terrorists, where to look for them?
First of all, in the telephone network, the entire scheme for the world is uniquely numbered.
Right.
That is, Zone 1 of the world is the U.S., Canada, and some of the islands. Zone 2 is Africa. Zone 3 and 4 are in South and North Europe. 5 is South America. 6 is Australia and Southeast Asia. 7 is Russia. 8 is the rest of Asia, China, and Japan, and so on. And 9 is the Middle East and South Asia.
Right.
Those are the numbers, like in your phone book, when you dial long distance, you hit 1. That means you're in zone 1.
Right.
If you go international, you have to dial 01 or 011 here in the United States for operator assisted or station to station. Then the next number you have to dial is the switch for the zone of the world.
So so everything is tracked, and there's similar IP addresses on the internet also.
And all of these things have to connect. After all, their machines routing this, so you have to tell them exactly what to do to get the ends connected in the world. So that's how you make the judgment of who's communicating with who.
But then, does it start with knowing that, okay, in Munich, there's a guy that actual field agents know is in Munich and has terrorist ties?
That's like a seed.
Yeah.
And that seed, then you'd look at all his phone calls, who he communicates with that number, or his email address, IP, or username, service provider, a combination, that kind of thing, or machine access code number. So there's a whole lot of ways you could do that, but that gives you the way pulling back together all the information that involves his communications, either in phone or email, or anything else, really. If he wants to visit something, you could still track it by that IP or things like that. So that then allows you to collapse all of the social network of that particular person back together, so you know their entire environment just from the metadata.
Right.
So that's why metadata is more important than content, really, because it gives you the scope of what they're up to, and also it allows you to order it in terms of a timeline, so you can see how they're interacting over time.
Right.
Whereas content won't necessarily do that for you.
And so, and I assume then that if you see suddenly somebody's placing a lot of calls, or a lot of long calls, or intermittent calls, or emails, or whatever, someplace you assume that something is up.
That's the first key, and then you focus in on it and try to figure it out. Yeah.